I remember the day clearly, the one that started like any other, but ended up leaving me with a nagging feeling I couldn't quite shake. It all began when Emily casually mentioned her upcoming vacation. At first, I thought nothing of it. Vacations were our thing, and the idea of a getaway was always welcome. But something in the way she said it caught my attention. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, and while I was half listening to a rerun of one of my favorite shows, Emily's tone shifted. She mentioned that she would be heading off with her mother, Sarah, and that they were going somewhere fancy. Her voice faltered for just a moment before she continued, "It's just an expensive vacation resort." That little pause, just a fraction of a second, seemed to speak volumes. I couldn't tell if it was uncertainty, hesitation, or something else entirely, but it was there lurking behind her words. I decided not to press the issue. Trust had always been the cornerstone of our relationship, and I believed in Emily completely. I reminded myself that perhaps she just didn't feel like going into details. After all, a luxurious vacation didn't come around every day. Besides, Emily had always been the type to enjoy a bit of mystery now and then, a way to keep life interesting, or so I assumed. Still, as I watched her gather her things later that evening, I couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of her inner conflict. There was a slight tension in her shoulders and an almost imperceptible delay when she responded to my questions about her itinerary. It wasn't like her to be so guarded, but I kept quiet, telling myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. After all, she was excited about the trip, or at least, that's what she tried to convey with a half-smile. That night, lying in bed with the dim glow of the streetlights casting soft patterns on the walls, I replayed our conversation in my mind. I thought about every word, every pause, trying to find some hidden meaning. But deep down, I trusted her. I told myself that sometimes people just need a little space, even if it comes wrapped in expensive holiday plans and half-answers. There was no reason to doubt her outright, even if a tiny voice in my head whispered otherwise. I tried to focus on the positives, imagining her enjoying a well-deserved break, laughing with her mother, and soaking up some luxury away from the everyday grind. I even pictured her taking countless photos of sunlit beaches and fancy resort dinners, all of which would serve as happy reminders of a getaway that was supposed to be relaxing and rejuvenating. And yet, beneath that veneer of confidence, I couldn't dismiss the odd flicker of worry that something was amiss. Looking back, I realized that even though I chose not to ask any more questions that day, a part of me remained vigilant, a quiet observer tucked away behind my trust. It wasn't a matter of mistrust or jealousy. It was simply an instinct that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this vacation than met the eye. But for now, I set those thoughts aside, determined to believe in Emily and her words. I went about my day as usual, trying to keep busy with work and little distractions around the house. Still, every now and then, I found myself glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until she would be gone. It was a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Anticipation for the return of her bright smile and comforting presence, and unease for the questions left unanswered. As the night deepened, I promised myself that when she returned, I'd casually bring up the vacation. Not as an interrogation, but as a gentle conversation to understand what had happened. After all, communication had always been our strength, even if, at that moment, I felt the stirrings of something I couldn't quite name. For now, I clung to my trust in her, even though a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. I couldn't shake it completely, but I also didn't want to be the one to water it with unnecessary suspicion. I convinced myself that everything would be perfectly fine, that she would come back refreshed and ready to share stories of a wonderful, if slightly mysterious, vacation. And until then, I settled in with the comforting belief that love and trust could weather even the most puzzling moments. When they finally came back after those long 19 days, nothing felt quite right. I was waiting for their return in our quiet home, hoping to see the familiar warmth in Emily's eyes. But instead, I was met with a heavy, almost defeated aura. The moment they stepped through the door, I noticed how exhausted they looked, Emily's face was drawn, and even Sarah's usually steady expression was marred by an unmistakable weariness. Without a word, they made a beeline for the bathroom, as if the first order of business was to wash away whatever had clung to them on the trip. I stood there, in that eerie silence, trying to process it all. There was a palpable tension in the air, an urgency that didn't belong in our otherwise calm household. Their hurried movements, the way they avoided meeting my eyes, all pointed to something more than just a tiring vacation. I couldn't help but feel that they were both nervously concealing a secret. Less than 48 hours after their return, things took another puzzling turn. Both Emily and Sarah, without any explanation, left for a checkup at the clinic. At first, I wondered if they'd picked up some kind of tropical bug from the resort, or maybe it was just the after effects of jet lag. But their anxious expressions and the haste with which they went made it clear that it wasn't as simple as recovering from a long journey. I spent that restless night lying in bed, the quiet of the house amplifying the clamor of my thoughts. My mind raced through every detail of their trip and their behavior since coming home. I kept replaying the moment they walked in, how they barely exchanged a word before disappearing behind the bathroom door, and how, soon after, I received a brief, hurried text from Emily saying they were at the clinic. Nothing more. Every instinct in me screamed that something was off. Was it just the physical toll of a strenuous vacation, or was there something more sinister at play? I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that they were hiding something that had deeply unsettled them. It wasn't the kind of secrecy I was used to in our relationship. It felt different, more desperate, more dangerous. In the following hours, I tried to piece together a plausible explanation. Had they encountered an unexpected crisis at the resort? Perhaps an accident or a sudden illness that required immediate medical attention. I mulled over these possibilities while battling a rising sense of dread that maybe I was missing a crucial detail, a hidden truth that could unravel everything I thought I knew about our lives. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that their behavior was unlike anything I'd ever seen from them. Emily's hesitant smiles and furtive glances, the way Sarah avoided direct conversation, it all added up to a story I couldn't quite grasp. I found myself questioning every moment from the last few days, scrutinizing the brief words they'd exchanged with me, and wondering if the vacation had changed them in ways I wasn't prepared for. By the time the morning light crept through the curtains, I had resolved to get to the bottom of it. But as much as I wanted answers, I knew I had to tread carefully. I didn't want to confront them too forcefully, fearing that the truth might be something even more complicated and dangerous than I imagined. Instead, I sat with my uncertainty, watching the clock and waiting for their return from the clinic, hoping that the doctors might provide some insight, or at least an explanation for the palpable tension that now shadowed our home. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger mystery. The uneasy silence and their secretive behavior had planted a seed of doubt in me, one that promised revelations and perhaps even consequences I hadn't anticipated. All I could do was wait and prepare myself for what might come next, even if it meant facing truths I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. My concern had been building ever since Emily and Sarah's return, and after witnessing their nervous, almost desperate behavior, I knew something was terribly off. That restless feeling wouldn't let me rest. With a gnawing anxiety, I found myself huddled in conversation with George, my father-in-law, whose own worry mirrored mine. We both sensed that there was more behind the sudden dash to the clinic than a simple post-vacation checkup. Late that night, we decided to follow them discreetly. It wasn't an impulsive act, but a desperate need for answers. We trailed at a careful distance, our car slowly creeping along familiar streets until we reached the modest building that housed the clinic. Every step toward that sterile, white structure felt heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the sensation that this place, normally so benign, now held the secrets to unraveling the mystery that was slowly consuming me. Inside, the clinical corridors were dim and quiet. a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. George and I moved as shadows, careful not to draw any unwanted attention. As we rounded a corner, we paused at a slightly ajar door, our ears straining to catch any snippet of conversation that might shed light on the events of these past days. Then it happened. A low, measured conversation from within the room made our blood run cold. I pressed my ear against the cool wall, barely daring to breathe as I caught every word. A doctor was speaking to a nurse, his tone clinical, yet laced with an urgency that I hadn't anticipated. I heard him say, almost as if he were stating a fact devoid of emotion, "Due to the specific circumstances of the conception, we need to do additional tests." For a long, suspended moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The single word, conception, echoed in my ears like a verdict, heavy with implications. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried desperately to comprehend what I had just heard. I exchanged a look with George. His face, usually so composed, was ashen and filled with the same unspoken horror I felt. What did they mean by conception? My mind raced, piecing together fragments of worry from the past few days. The vacation, their exhaustion, the frantic dash to the clinic. All of it now took on a sinister hue. Could it be that something had happened between Emily and someone, or something, that I had never suspected? The thought was as absurd as it was terrifying, yet the gravity in the doctor's tone suggested there was no mistake in his words. I leaned in closer, straining to catch any more details, but the conversation continued just beyond the point where our hidden presence could gather additional clues. The doctor's words had been measured, professional, and yet charged with an implication that I couldn't ignore. The phrase "specific circumstances" suggested that whatever had occurred was not random, but rather a culmination of events that might have been set in motion long before their return home. George's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the banister, his eyes locked onto mine in silent communication. We both understood that the implications of that single sentence were vast and deeply personal. I felt a growing dread, a sinking realization that the life I thought I knew was built on a foundation now cracking with secrets and hidden truths. What if the vacation had been more than just a luxurious escape? What if it had been the stage for a series of events so meticulously orchestrated that its consequences would shake the very core of our family? The thought was unbearable, yet it was creeping into my consciousness with each passing second. In that sterile corridor, as I stood frozen with fear and confusion, the weight of every unanswered question pressed down on me. The clinic's bright lights, usually so comforting in their promise of healing, now seemed to spotlight our vulnerability. Every detail, the hushed tones, the clipped inflection of specific circumstances, the urgent need for additional tests, added layers to a mystery that was rapidly spiraling out of control. I struggled to reconcile the image of the woman I loved with the enigma that now loomed over our family. Emily had always been warm and open, yet in those fleeting moments at the clinic, a shadow of someone else seemed to flicker in her eyes, a secret she had locked away, even from me. And Sarah, whose presence had always been a stabilizing force, now appeared burdened by a worry that was as tangible as the tension in the corridor. I found myself questioning everything. Had I been a fool to trust so implicitly? Was there something in the vacation that I had missed? A signal I should have heeded? A clue I should have pieced together? The idea that the circumstances of conception could be specific suggested that fate, or perhaps someone's deliberate design, had intervened in a way that neither Emily nor I could have anticipated. In that heartbeat of silence after the doctor's words, I felt a mix of betrayal, confusion, and a desperate need to uncover the truth. It wasn't just about uncovering a secret. It was about understanding the very fabric of our lives and realizing that perhaps the foundations of our relationship had been built on shifting sands all along. George and I slowly backed away from that door, our minds whirling with possibilities. We didn't speak a word as we retreated into the relative safety of the hallway, our unasked questions and fears echoing louder than any conversation could. I knew that confronting this revelation would shatter the calm I had so desperately clung to. Yet the alternative, remaining ignorant, felt far worse. Now, as I sit here piecing together the fragments of that night, I realize that my world has irrevocably changed. The question of what conception truly meant in this context haunts me every moment, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary events hide extraordinary secrets. And in the silent recesses of that clinic's hallway, I caught but a glimpse of a truth that I fear may unravel everything I once believed about my family, and even about myself. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, Emily and Sarah emerged from the office. The corridor was quiet, almost oppressive, and every step they took seemed burdened by a secret they were desperate to keep hidden. I couldn't hold back any longer. As soon as we were alone, I fixed my gaze on Emily and blurted out, "Whose child is this?" For a split second, her eyes darted away, and I could see the panic rising beneath the surface of her carefully maintained calm. She began to mumble something incoherent, half-formed excuses that didn't seem to answer my question at all. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. I repeated the question, my voice firmer this time, unwilling to let the matter drop. Under the mounting pressure, something in her snapped. In a voice that was raw and edged with fury, she shouted, "It's not your child." Her words reverberated off the sterile walls, leaving a charged silence in their wake. I stood there, stunned, my heart hammering in disbelief at the implications of what she had just declared. Before I could process the fallout of her outburst, the door at the far end of the hallway swung open and a familiar figure stepped in. Alex, my best friend. I never expected to see him there, not in that moment, not in that place. His presence, like a jolt of electricity, added another layer of complexity to an already shattering scene. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Alex's eyes, wide with shock and confusion, locked onto mine. I could tell from the way he froze that he, too, was wrestling with the unexpected turn of events. My mind raced with questions. What was he doing here? Had he been in on this secret all along? Or was his appearance purely coincidental? The unexpected reunion of trust and betrayal in that single hallway left me reeling. Emily's expression contorted with a mix of anger and regret. She seemed torn between defending herself and the overwhelming need to conceal the truth. Meanwhile, Sarah stood silently beside her, her face betraying a sorrow and resignation that hinted at deep-seated secrets. The sight of them together, under such strange circumstances, made it abundantly clear that nothing in our lives was as simple as it once seemed. Alex took a hesitant step forward, his presence almost pleading for clarity in the chaos of the moment. I could see that his heart was pounding as much as mine, his face a canvas of concern and disbelief. The unspoken questions between us grew louder in that cramped corridor, a silent conversation loaded with confusion, anger, and hurt. The revelation, or rather, the partial revelation, of that single explosive statement from Emily shattered the fragile equilibrium of our lives. I felt betrayed and exposed, as if the foundation of trust we'd built over the years was crumbling beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about our family, our relationships, and the secrets we kept hidden was suddenly up for debate. In that charged silence, with Alex standing unexpectedly by my side, I realized that this was the turning point. The truth about the mysterious vacation, the hurried clinic visit, and the doctor's cryptic words about conception were no longer abstract concerns. They were personal, raw, and deeply intertwined with the woman I loved. And now, with her vehement denial echoing in the hall, I was forced to confront a reality I hadn't dared to imagine. I took a shaky breath, my mind churning with the implications of what she'd just shouted. "It's not your child." Her words reverberated not only in the hall, but deep within me, stirring up emotions of betrayal, confusion, and an overwhelming need for answers. Alex's unexpected arrival added another layer of complexity to a puzzle that was quickly spiraling out of control. Standing there, with my best friend's uncertain eyes meeting mine, I knew that the calm facade of our lives was long gone. The path ahead was fraught with painful truths and shattering revelations, and there was no turning back. The question hung between us like a specter, one that promised to unravel everything I thought I understood about love, trust, and family. In that moment, the hallway became the setting for a confrontation that I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one that I had to face. I had to demand the truth, regardless of the cost. The storm of emotions inside me, anger, hurt, confusion, and a desperate need for answers, compelled me to step closer, to push past the shock and betrayal, and to finally confront the secret that had threatened to tear our lives apart. Alex's calm tone cut through the charged silence as he said, "We need to talk." Those words, so deceptively gentle, carried the weight of a confession that would shatter everything I thought I knew. I stared at him, my mind reeling, while the hallway around us seemed to close in tighter with every heartbeat. Before I could even muster a question, the dam of secrets burst forth. With a measured, almost sorrowful air, Alex admitted what I never wanted to hear. For 3 years, he and Emily had been together. 3 years. The words reverberated in my chest like a death knell, each syllable chiseling away at the foundation of trust one had so dearly clung to. It felt as though the very ground beneath me was crumbling, leaving me suspended in a void of betrayal and disbelief. The flood of emotions was overwhelming. In a moment of raw, unbridled rage, I slammed my fist against the wall. The sharp, reverberating thud was not just an expression of anger. It was my desperate attempt to externalize the pain that threatened to consume me. The impact sent a shockwave through my body, but nothing could dull the searing betrayal that was now laid bare before me. Amid the chaos, George's voice rang out, sharp and accusatory. "Sarah, how could you let this happen?" he bellowed, his words laced with a mixture of anger and hurt. I watched, stunned, as his gaze shifted to Sarah. The woman I had always seen as a pillar of support now bore the burden of guilt on her face, a silent admission that she had known everything all along. Her silence spoke louder than any words could, each glance filled with regret and resignation. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as I struggled to piece together the fragments of this shattering revelation. My voice, raw with emotion, cut through the tension. "I know you had another man," I shouted, the accusation aimed at Emily. In that moment, every trust one had placed in her evaporated, replaced by a searing sense of betrayal that left me reeling. The shock of her duplicity was too immense, too deeply personal, to be contained by words alone. I turned to Alex then. His face, once familiar and warm, had drained of color, replaced by an expression of dawning horror. The realization hit him hard, a cruel twist of fate that revealed he too was a victim in this tangled web of lies. His eyes, now wide and full of regret, mirrored the shock and pain that churned within me. In that instant, the roles we thought we played in each other's lives blurred into something unrecognizable, as if we were both ensnared in a trap laid by our own actions. Every detail of the past 3 years came crashing down around me. The stolen glances, the secret smiles, the whispered phone calls in the dead of night. All of it now reinterpreted as pieces of a puzzle that had betrayed me at its very core. I felt as if time had slowed to a crawl, each moment stretching into an eternity of agony and disbelief. The corridor, once a mundane passageway in our everyday lives, had transformed into a stage for the ultimate betrayal. My heartbeat roared in my ears as I took in the scene. The hurt etched in George's face as he confronted Sarah, the conflicted sorrow in Emily's eyes, and the unmistakable shock that had overtaken Alex. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, bearing silent witness to the disintegration of everything I once believed in. In the haze of my fury and despair, every instinct screamed that nothing was as it appeared. The realization that Emily had chosen another man, my best friend, no less, was a wound so deep it seemed almost impossible to heal. The raw emotions surged through me like wildfire. I could feel the bitterness of every broken promise and every lie told in the name of convenience and betrayal. As the echoes of my outbursts subsided, a heavy, suffocating silence settled over us. The weight of the confession, combined with the realization of how intricately our lives had been intertwined with deceit, left me numb. My mind raced through a tumult of thoughts. How had I been so blind? What had I missed in the subtle signs that now screamed at me with every fiber of my being? And most painfully, how could I ever trust again? Alex's eyes, filled with an unspoken apology and horror, told me that he never intended to hurt me. Yet, the damage was done. His confession, delivered in a tone that was both calm and heart-wrenchingly honest, revealed a truth that fractured not just my relationship with Emily, but also the very bond of friendship that had once defined us. In that moment, I realized that betrayal is not always black and white. Sometimes, even the ones you trust the most can become unintentional victims of their own mistakes. I stood there, chest heaving, every pulse a reminder of the betrayal that had just been unveiled. The corridor, the walls, even the very air around me seemed to echo with the gravity of the moment, a moment that would forever redefine the contours of our lives. As I looked around at the faces that surrounded me, each marked by their own pain and regret, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Every trust, every secret, every shared moment had now been tainted by the harsh reality of deceit. In that charged silence, as I grappled with the raw truth, I understood that the journey ahead would be fraught with heartache and hard choices. The man I had loved, the friend I had trusted, both were now irreparably changed, caught in the same relentless storm of betrayal. And as the weight of the revelation settled deep within me, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, could any of us ever emerge from this darkness unscathed, or were we all destined to carry the scars of this confession for the rest of our lives? A few days later, the tension that had been building finally exploded into a moment I'll never forget. The door swung open abruptly, and there stood Alex, clutching a sealed envelope in a shaking hand. His eyes, usually so warm and understanding, now blazed with a fury I had never seen before. Without any preamble, he thrust the envelope in front of Emily and bellowed, "You made me believe that this is my child." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stood frozen for a heartbeat, absorbing the raw betrayal in his voice. In that charged moment, I couldn't help but let a wry, bitter smile curl my lips. I stepped forward, my tone cold and measured as I said, "Congratulations, friend. You have become her toy too." My words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the finality of shattered illusions. Alex's face went pale, the anger giving way to a deep, soul-crushing despair. His eyes, wide with the shock of betrayal, flickered with a mixture of regret and anguish, a silent acknowledgement that he too had been manipulated by a web of lies. I watched, heart sinking, as the gravity of the situation overwhelmed him. The DNA test results, now incontrovertible, had confirmed what we all feared. He was not the father. Every secret, every whispered promise, every hidden moment of deceit suddenly coalesced into a painful truth that could not be undone. The life we had all known was unraveling, thread by thread, until nothing remained but a tapestry of lies. Emily's face contorted with a mix of anger and sorrow as she tried to muster a defense that would deflect the collapse of her carefully constructed facade. But there was nothing left to say. The silence between us was punctured only by the echoes of our shattered past, each memory now tainted by betrayal. In that moment, the room felt colder, the very walls closing in as if to trap us in a nightmare we could neither escape nor fully comprehend. Outside, the world continued its indifferent march, oblivious to the ruin unfolding behind those closed doors. Alex's despair was too much to bear. With a last, agonizing look that spoke of lost trust and broken dreams, he turned on his heel, grabbed his bag, and walked out the door for the final time. His departure was as abrupt as it was definitive, leaving behind not only his presence, but also the remnants of a friendship that had once been the cornerstone of our lives. Not long after, the last blow came from an unexpected source. George, whose anger had simmered since the revelations first began, stepped forward. His face was etched with pain and betrayal as he looked at Emily, a look that conveyed both disappointment and a sense of irrevocable loss. "I can't do this anymore," he declared, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and sorrow. "I officially disown you." His words sliced through the air with the finality of a guillotine's drop. In that instant, the last vestige of the family I had known was shattered. George's disownment wasn't just a rejection. It was the erasure of a lifetime of shared memories, trust, and love, now rendered meaningless by deceit. The man who had once been our steadfast pillar of support was now a figure consumed by grief and disillusionment. Standing there amidst the ruins, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. The intricate network of lies that had sustained our lives for so long had collapsed entirely, leaving nothing but the debris of broken trust and lost hope. I looked around at the faces of those who had once meant everything to me, now distorted by betrayal and regret. It was a moment of unbearable clarity. The life we had built together was nothing more than an illusion, meticulously constructed on secrets that had finally been exposed. In the echo of that final confrontation, I realized that everything was irreversibly changed. The person I loved, the friend I trusted, and even the family bonds that had once held us together were now severed beyond repair. As Alex's absence became a tangible void and George's stern disownment echoed in the silence, I couldn't help but wonder if there was any path left forward from this wreckage. Now, as I sit in the aftermath, grappling with the fragments of a life that has all but crumbled, I am forced to confront the harsh reality that sometimes the collapse of everything is not a sudden event, but the inevitable end of a long, destructive unraveling. Every secret, every lie has a price, and today we have all paid the ultimate toll. I didn't wait around. The morning after everything had come crashing down, I filed for divorce. The paperwork was signed, sealed, and delivered, a final, irrevocable act that cost me $320,000. Sure, that was a huge sum, but to me it was a small price for reclaiming my freedom. I had long suspected that the life we'd built was nothing more than a house of cards constructed on lies. The financial loss was trifling compared to the weight that lifted off my shoulders when I walked away from it all. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement I insisted on, Emily got not a cent of it. Every dollar, every asset, remained firmly mine, a testament to the justice of our unraveling. 6 weeks later, I learned something that confirmed my darkest suspicions. Emily had lost her job. Her reputation, tainted by years of deceit and betrayal, had caught up with her. I soon discovered that she was now living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, her life reduced to the remnants of a ruinous spiral she had created herself. I received a string of desperate messages from her, each one pleading for a conversation, an apology, or maybe even a reconciliation. But I let them all go unanswered. I refused to be dragged back into the chaos that had already shattered my life beyond repair. The truth was painfully clear. Some people don't even deserve a goodbye. They deserve to be left exactly where they fell, lost in the wreckage of their own making, with no one to rescue them from the consequences of their actions. I watched from afar as Emily's world disintegrated further. Each failed attempt at rebuilding her life, a stark reminder of the destruction she'd orchestrated. There was no sympathy in my heart, only a cold resolve that I would not partake in her endless cycle of self-destruction. For me, the divorce was not merely an end, it was the beginning of a rebirth. I felt a profound sense of liberation, as if I had finally exorcised the demons of betrayal and deceit that had haunted me for so long. The bitterness of the past was slowly being replaced by a cautious optimism about the future. Every day, I built a little more of the life I deserved, one based on honesty and self-respect, rather than the fragile promises of a relationship steeped in lies. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. I lost a significant amount of money, and with it, the remnants of a life that was never truly mine. But in the end, the price I paid was nothing compared to the burden of living a lie. I walked away with my head held high, leaving behind the chaos and destruction Emily had sown. No dramatic farewell was exchanged. No tearful goodbyes were whispered. Just a quiet, resolute exit from a chapter that was better left closed forever. Now, when I reflect on everything that happened, I see it all as a lesson in the ultimate price of deception. Some people, like Emily, create their own downfall with every lie they tell, and in the end, they deserve nothing more than to be left to the ruins of their own making. I've moved on, free from the chains of betrayal and ready to embrace a future where trust and integrity aren't just words, but the very foundation of my life.